Hey everyone, my name is Jonah, and I'm the producer of a few plugins on Bubble. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Security Salamander. Security Salamander is a plugin that's designed to protect your endpoints. It's designed to allow you to more securely use webhooks from API services like Stripe and Plaid, and it can also help you secure your app-to-app endpoints. So if you have one Bubble app, another Bubble app, or any other app that you want to connect with your Bubble app, there's not much ways of securing your endpoints right now with Bubble. Nothing too high tech. So we're going to look at what Security Salamander can do for you. We're going to look at the different actions that it comes with, and I'll show you how I used Security Salamander to secure my endpoint as a quick tutorial. And I'm always active on the forums, so if anyone has any questions, you can always type something in the forums. You can leave a comment on the YouTube video. You can send me a message. But if you have a question or a suggestion, it's best to write it in the forum. Okay, so first, let's look at Security Salamander, what it comes with. It comes with several actions. JWK to PEM, verify JWT signature, decode a JWT, create a JWT, encrypt with SHA-256, this is an encryption method, verify JWT issued at time, get field from JSON, stringify JS object, generate UUID, create a JWE, and node fetch. And so, as you can see, there's many actions here that are specific to JSON Web Tokens and JSON Web Token protocols like JSON Web Key, JWK, JWE, for instance. But there's also a lot more general things like create a UUID, which is just something that we oftentimes have to do when we create API calls or when we work with different services or webhooks. Sometimes we need to create a UUID, so there's that in there for you too. Stringify JS object, this is a JavaScript JSON utility. Get field from JSON as well. Node fetch is another general utility that's super useful actually, and we'll get into that this video. But before we go any further, if you have no idea what a JWT is, JWK, JWE, if you have no idea what this is, I really strongly recommend you visit the website jwt.io. JWT.io has a lot of information about JSON Web Tokens. It has a decoder and an encoder where you can play around with and see how they're structured. They have an introduction, they have forums, they have recommended libraries, they have debuggers. They have all sorts of information that you can find out about JWTs on this website. And also, of course, YouTube is always your best friend, right? So, now that I've got that out of the way, this plugin's for people who are really familiar with that stuff, and they're looking for a way to either secure their endpoints or to use certain services. For instance, I want to bring you guys to a place called Plaid, and if you don't know what Plaid is, it's a fintech API that's useful for getting information about a particular bank account or a particular person's credit card or stuff. So for instance, if I want to check a user's balance before I try to make a charge on their account, this is what I would do. I would use Plaid. So Plaid, I'm going to go to one of their sections called Plaid Webhooks. Okay, Plaid Webhooks are, well, if you don't know what webhooks are messages sent out from API services to your app to notify you about something in particular. It could be anything. So it's the opposite of an API request. So when we do an API request to an external service, we're asking them to do something, or we're asking them to give us some information. Webhook is an API service saying, hey, this so-and-so happened to one of your users, for instance, or there's a new product available, or hey, the Seattle Seahawks won the last game. Anything. It could be literally anything, right? That's what a webhook is. Which also means the problem is that they can come from anywhere, not just the API service. They could come from some sort of hacker, some sort of person who wants to create some problems in your database, an ex-girlfriend, it could be. It could be anyone, right? It's best practice to secure your endpoints because we want to make sure that if we're handling any sensitive data or we're handling any data that could cause negative effects to our users, we want to secure the endpoint. For me, for instance, there is a webhook on the Plaid ecosystem that notifies me that there's some new transactions of a particular user. And those transactions I use to round up. So I round up every transaction, okay? So if someone makes a transaction for $1.60 and they bought a cheeseburger or whatever they bought, chocolate bar, it gets rounded up to $2. I take the difference, the 40 cents, right? And for every transaction over a period of time, I tally those differences up. And then at the end of the period, the tally, I charge on the person's credit card. It's a way of doing roundup purchasing, it's called. This isn't important, these details, but what I'm trying to say is if someone sent in some fraudulent information and messed up all of my users' tallies, it would cause me problems because I'm now charging the wrong amount to my users' credit cards. And that would be horrible for our platform, my client's platform in particular. So we need a way to protect our endpoints, right? You might have other reasons why you need to protect them, but there's reasons why we have to protect endpoints. So Plaid has a guide called, let's see here, Webhook Verification Guide. And so when I made this endpoint, I realized that anyone could try sending something to my endpoint, and if they formatted it correctly, then they could spoof and they could pretend as if they're Plaid. They could even do some IP trickery where they pretend that they were Plaid as well. So there's lots of ways that we don't want that we can get fooled. So that's why just going off of IP address is not the way to go. Hell, the person could be from Plaid, for all I know. But I need to know it's a legit request. So the steps to verify a Plaid webhook, and this is probably not important to you, but I'm going to show you why this plugin needed to exist. So the first step would be from the API request, to extract the JWT header. And this is where we get into problems, because if we go back to the jwt.io website, we'll see that JWTs follow a specific format. Okay, they look like this. Right, this is not legible in the human language. We can't just read this and know what it is. This is what we call a base 64 encoded data. And so it's encoded. It's not encrypted, but it's encoded. We can't read this ourselves. Right? And so the way that we do it is with some code, we can decode this and we can see the different parts of the JWT. So there's a header. There's a payload. I don't know why that's doing that. So here's a header, okay. There's a payload, which is basically the body, and there's a signature at the end, which is like, you can think about it as if someone signed at the bottom of a piece of paper. It's analogous to that. Anyways, the specifics of how this works is not super important to everyone, but this is what it looks like. And so the takeaway from this is that we can't read this. We need some computer to do this for us. And that's what Security Salamander does. It can extract any information from a JWT header. So if we look at this action here, decode JWT, it has some fields, and the first one is token, part to decode, and the value to extract. Now let me go to my actual implementation here. I'm going to edit out the API workflow so you won't be able to actually see where this is, but okay, so here I renamed it something, but this is actually extract JWT, get KID from JWT. And so this is that first action that we just looked at here, decode JWT, not extract. So this action, what it does is it asks you for the token. It asks you, okay, inside the token there's 3 parts, so which one do you want? Which part do we want to decode? The header, payload, or the signature? So in my case I needed the header because there's a field that I want to extract a value from it. Excuse me, and that field is called KID. Now if I wanted to get the sub, and then I would write sub here, and that was what would be returned from this function. Okay. So that's just a very useful tool because right away now we can read JWTs. Okay, and here what I have in my flow is if the JWT's KID is empty or whatever, if it doesn't exist, the field itself, then I terminate the workflow. Basically, this is my authenticate flow. So if there's no KID in here, then right away that's a problem. So I cancel it. This is not from Plaid because Plaid always has the KID. The next step, now this is Plaid specific, but Plaid has an API call called get verification key, and you need the KID, the key ID to do this API call. So this is why I needed to implement the JWT function, the decode JWT function, because I needed the KID for this get verification key API call. Right, the specifics, it's not important for you guys, but what you need to know is that you can decode a JWT, get a field from it. Okay, cool. Next, sometimes you need to transform a JSON web key into a PEM. Now I forget what PEM stands for. What does PEM stand for? Well, I think PEM just means private key. Yeah. PEM just means it's a type of private key. Okay? PEM is used for validating or signing a JWT. And so sometimes you need to, and I get a JWK back from step 4 here, get verification key. I get a JWK back, and sometimes we need to transform a JWK to PEM. So this action here, JWK to PEM, is super useful for that. Because inside of Bubble, we don't have access to physical files that we can get stuff from. Because normally, with a PEM, we have a PEM file stored somewhere on a server, or somewhere, and someplace somewhere, and we need to use the PEM file. We can't do that, so this JWK to PEM action transfers a JWK into a PEM text, which works. And so that's super cool. The next step is verify JWT signature. So you provided a public or private key, right? You give it the token in question, so the token and the private or public key, and you give it the algorithm that it needs. So in my case, I get the alg, which is in most JSON web tokens, right? There's an alg in the header, right? And so the person who is sending the JWT, the person who's sending out a JWT, unless they're Plaid, they won't know which algorithm to use. And so the alg is written inside of the actual webhook request. So I get it from the webhook request, the key alg. But you could hard code this if you want. And down here is a list of supported algorithms. And so, okay, this is how we verify a JWT signature. And so this will fail, like the result, the extracted field will be empty if this doesn't work. Okay, so there's an extracted field that I want from this result, and the extracted field is request body SHA-256. This is the field. So this verified JWT signature is going to verify the JWT signature, and then at the end, if it passes, I can extract a field from it. Okay, and this is the field that I want. Request body SHA-256. I terminate the workflow if it didn't work. There's actually a few exposed states here. There's a result, an error message, an extracted field. And I terminate the workflow if the error is yes. So if this didn't work, error is yes, stop the workflow. This isn't from Plaid. Next step, get field from JSON. So what I do is I take this step's result. It has a result. This is a get field from JSON. This is part of the plugin. We take result of step 6, result. This is the JSON. And then I want a field from it, so I need the IAT. Okay, so this is another tool we can do. We can take a JSON, we can feed it a JSON, and then extract a field from it. Super duper useful. The next step is verify JWT issued at time. So what's really cool with JSON Web Tokens is that they come with a timestamp. And sometimes what hackers do is that they intercept your calls, or they breach your data somehow, somewhere, and they find an old JWT lying around, and they save it. And then they figure out a way to get past all of the steps here, which would be highly unlikely, but let's say they did. They figured out a way to get past all these steps. And they're like, I'm going to use this old JWT because an old JWT would work in all of these steps. It wouldn't fail. And I'm going to try to cause an attack with the old token every time. Well, that wouldn't work because we can verify the JWT issued at time. And so the issued at time, we get it from the get field from JSON. So this is a particular timestamp. And then we give it a minimum time. And this is in milliseconds, I believe. Exactly. Token issued at time, IAT, must not be older than X milliseconds. And this X milliseconds here is 300,000 seconds, which is 5 minutes. So minimum time is 5 minutes ago. So basically, if they found an old token, they figured out a way to get past all of this, and then they sent it, well, it wouldn't work because the minimum time is 5 minutes. So they would have had to done that in 5 minutes, and that's highly unlikely that they could do something like that. Almost extremely impossible, but nothing's impossible, but almost impossible. So I terminate the workflow if they verify JWTs, the result of step 9, right? There's an exposed state called valid. If the valid is no, then that means that this is a super old token. This is not meet the requirements, so it didn't pass. That's what happens here. Okay, so really useful, by the way. This is not simple. And then encrypt the SHA-256. This is something that I have to do. This is a general encryption tool, but sometimes we want to encrypt the request body in this instance. We want to hash it. We want to encrypt it in SHA-256, which is an encryption algorithm used in Bitcoin. It's an encryption algorithm used in all sorts of places, and what it does is it doesn't encode, but it encrypts something so that we can't easily decrypt it, meaning that I can take some information, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, I can write it in a bunch of scrambled letters or scrambled characters, so that it would be really difficult to figure out, well, how do I decode this? Well, you can't unless you brute force it, which is a whole other story. But encrypt the SHA-256 is another action, super useful, because what I use it for is I encrypt the body, and what I say is result of step 11, encrypt the SHA-256 hashed value is not, so the encrypted value is not, step 6, verify JWT signature is extracted field. So that body, once encrypted, has to be the exact same as a particular extracted field inside of the JWT. So this is a part of the webhook verification flow. They tell us that it has to do that. This is just specific to Plaid. So that's why encrypt the SHA-256 is a useful thing to do. Could be useful for other things too. Okay, and then there's some other stuff that's not important to you guys. So this is how I use the JWTs, and this is how I use Security Salamander. If we look at the actual endpoint itself, what you'll see is that when the API workflow happens, right, I schedule an API workflow 1 minute from now, so basically right away. It's called Authenticate V2. And this is my Authenticate flow. And what happens is that at the end of the Authenticate flow, I run some some workflows here. Update tally, right? What I was talking about before earlier in the video. Update tally gets run only if the request JWT passes all of these authentication actions. So Security Salamander, what it will do in general is it lets you manage your authentication. So it lets you manage, okay, how do I make sure that a request is really coming from the person I'm expecting it to come from? And only you would know that, right? Or if you're using Plaid, only Plaid would know that, or Stripe, only Stripe would know that. So that's the super usefulness with JSON Web Tokens. It's used a lot for securing your endpoints. And Security Salamander is just a general toolbox of different utilities that's useful for many of these implementations. I used it for Plaid, and I also tested it with Stripe. Stripe, you can encrypt pins, like a credit card pin, before sending it out. Those encrypted pins are done with this action here called create a JWE. So that's what's super cool about Security Salamander as well. And the last thing I want to look at is node fetch. This is super cool because what we can do is we can fetch a particular URL, and we can get the return JSON from it. So sometimes there's a public JSON web key stored out in the wild. And for instance, Stripe, you use node fetch to fetch that URL, and then once you fetch the URL, you can create a JWE with it. So that's super cool. These are just some examples of things you can do with this. I'm sure there's a lot more you can do with this, but also this isn't complete. So there's so much stuff about JSON web tokens that doesn't exist here. JSON web keys, JWEs. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can't do with this, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do with this. So before purchasing, I would read these fields here, and I'll put them inside of the documentation, inside of the plugin page. I'll put the list of actions, and if you think that these actions won't apply to your specific use case, then this probably won't work for you. And what you can do is you can send me a message, or you can write something on the forum post, and maybe I'll have enough time to implement that for you. Okay, so that's it. Security Salamander. Once again, secure your endpoints, secure app-to-app connections, and lets you interact with more complicated API systems like Stripe. Well, thank you very much, and have a good day. See ya.